always struggle afterwards with the technology being here. So let me start this, guys. So I wanted to introduce Brother Itu by reading a very short quote from Nietzsche. And the quote, it reads like this: "The snake that cannot cast its skin has to die." And then in quotation or out of quotation, so do minds and spirits who are prevented from changing their opinions. This man right here that we have tonight is the man who outgrows things. He grows every time. And if you have to read his entire bio, which we don't have time to that, you will know that he's always outgrowing things. He's like a scientist. The article that was published last month, by next month, somebody else can come up with another experiment, and that is like, doesn't apply anymore. So Brother Itu does that. He grew up from a vast experience of different knowledge and influence, and out of that, he's outgrown all of them and come out of that and became who he is. The last time I saw him was July last year in 2022, and I have no doubt that he has outgrown something from that time to now. And but anyways, let me highlight 3 things here. I'm just going to highlight in his bio. I have this first paragraph. I think it should say everything because we don't have much time here. So, Mr. Itumeleng Makale is an Afrocentric Black nationalist thinker and African sovereignist and enduring conversational fellow in spaces that are intellectual and spiritually replenished with Black power embodied meditation. The psycho-spiritual turning point stations and intellectual grapplings in his evolutionary quest for life enhancing and sustaining essential and existential elements, ideas, outlooks, and philosophies for African people, were Islam, Christianity, and Black Hebrews, which worldviews he later outgrew to gravitating to stronger Afrocentric leanings, with which he sought to establish a Pan-Africanist conscious, a Black consciousness, and filtered in utilitarian approach to give impetus to the African re-education and conscious raising psycho-spiritual aspect of African restorative revolutionary project. There's a lot there, which I don't want to impact today. I think that once you hear him, some of these things are going to impact itself right over there. The man is a philosopher. Itumeleng's major philosophical turning point was in his encounter in his mid-teens with the Black conscious movement through the high school student chapter of movement called Azanian Student Movement in the early 90s, which movement he also outgrew ideologically. I told you that the outgrowing is a theme here. And Itu is a writer. He's published so many works, but his first work was in 2008, which is called Up, You Mighty Race. There's many more after that. He's a visionary, he's a philosopher, he's a father. He has done so many projects, and he's always speaking. He's a musician. I was talking to him the other day, and I know that on Friday, you'll be speaking, I don't know if it's a radio program, which is known as Unpopular Opinions. I mean, you can grab there what's going to be happening. And I don't want to go too much to take time because you're here. We have told the students a little bit about you, about the TEHUTI, and we would like you to tonight to introduce the TEHUTI to these students who are learning both about the challenges in Southern Africa and in the United States, especially in our city of Richmond. With that, Brother Itu, we welcome you. And please reintroduce yourself if there is something that you want to set up the TEHUTI, and get to share with us what are the TEHUTI, how you get to be engaged with them, and what is the meaning of it, like right now, what is it that it seeks to, what is its goal, and where is it, what are the challenges of it, and what are some successes? Thank you.
Thank you, Dingaan. Peace and love to you all. I think you have done justice, my brother, in the introduction. I need not, I feel I don't have to add anything there. And thank you so much. You've been far too kind. And I don't know if I'm audible.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. So understanding knowledge to be related to power, knowledge to be a conduit of power relations, within any given social dynamic. It means knowledge has to have a conceptual framework or a paradigm that is reflective of whatever cultural preconceptions those who create, and produce and disseminate that particular knowledge within a given social dynamic, have their minds, pervaded, with. So knowledge, can never be neutral. Knowledge has to have a cultural, ethical, spiritual, philosophical, political locus, for its, origin. Now, in the psychohistory, of a people who birthed me, what is accounted for is a dynamic of a people who possess knowledge that was imposed, knowledge from an epistemological conceptual framework that does not reflect the foregrounding in the culture, of my people. The implication being knowledge that does not respond to the promptings and yearnings of my people for its lack of cultural foregrounding as per the conceptual framework through which, this particular knowledge that I'm a recipient of myself and my people within the power relations and dynamics of a dominated people. So I'm a product of a dominated people, and as such have had, my consciousness by virtue of being a member of a dominated people, first and foremost cognitively, through imposed epistemological framework that is exacted, in the space that is called academia. From the kindergarten, by academia, I go as far back as the kindergarten. By academia, I also include even ecclesiastical, institutions. because this irrelevant, hegemonic, epistemology, not only has it, by its irrelevance, dislocated us, intellectually, misoriented our consciousness, but it has also castrated, us. By us, I mean, the natives, the indigenous people, the race that is indigenous to where, I am located, and that is in Africa. So the epistemological conceptual framework that we, formulated as a response to these hegemonic epistemologies that are expressed and manifested in all areas of people activity, where essence and existence, in how they have permeated us, cannot be seen as being mutually exclusive. We respond, to the academic, and I'll explain why I use the term academic adversarially. Why am I using it adversarially? I'm using the term academic adversarially because the term academic has, a cultural, genesis point. Words contain, images that cultures that they carry have fashioned. Words encapsulate, imaginations that a particular culture, has fashioned. So words have weight, and the weight of words is in their meaning. So academia, academy, academic, these are words, in those variants, that I have mentioned them in, that have cultural axis that foregrounds them, in Greek, specifically in Athens, where I delineate a distinction between what is culture specific and what is, an exerted, cultural arrogance to dislocate people from their cultural specificities, to have them convey themselves to life through a pathway that is on a trajectory of what is dictated upon, as how they should live their lives from the place of dislocation. Academos is the root word by etymological origin to the word academy, academia, academic, and whatever, variants, there may be to this word. The Greek biographist and essayist of antiquity by the name of Plutarch, in one of his essays, the story of King Theseus, introduces us to the character, called Academos, who features in the story as the one who helped the two brothers who were looking for their abducted sister, their kidnapped sister. The sister was kidnapped by the king. The name of the king was King Theseus. And the fellow called Academos gave them a tip off where their sister Helen, had been concealed, had been hidden by the kidnapper king, Theseus. And they went there and engaged, in a war. The battle ensued, and they regained their sister. And Academos, as a result of that, because he's the one who gave them a tip off, the two brothers, about where their sister has been concealed, and enabled them to win the war, was hailed in Athens as a war deity, as a war hero. This is a legend. This is a folk tale. This is not a historical occurrence. So Plato established a school at the olive groves of Athens in front of a gymnasium that was named in honor of Academos, who was the Athenian war hero or war deity or war god. And he also adopted the name to do what was a culturally specific thing, to name his school of philosophy after a cultural, mythological, icon, of Athens, and that is Academos. So his school was called the Academy. The Academy was but one of the schools in Greece or in the land of the Hellas. The Academy was one of the schools. The Academy was not the school or the educational institution, but it was but one of them, simply named after Academos. So the Platonic thought, because it was the only thought, in Greece that had created a school that allows for different perspectives, to be entertained. It was not hegemonic. It was not an intellectually hegemonic school, epistemologically hegemonic school. It allowed for different perspectives. Other schools had rigid, ideological inclinations. So the Platonic thought could not allow for that. Now, what is called academy today, or the space of learning, scholarship, tuition, research, that is called the academia today, is basically continuation of that cultural, memorial, trajectory of what started in Greece, at Athens. So what I am questioning is, there is what Professor Mama Marimba Ani calls the Asili conceptual framework, which is her formulation to study a people's cultural thought and behavior. The word asili is a Kiswahili word, which means essence or seed. So she uses that word to name a conceptual framework she uses to study people's cultural thought and behavior. And asili is tracing people's cultural thought and behavior by their cultural essence, or their asilic. I took it further, to add IC, the suffix IC to the word asili, as my neologism, that I'm introducing, developing from what she had already pioneered by using the word asili in her framework that she uses in her critique, study of people's cultural thoughts and behaviors. So you study people's cultural thought and behavior by going deeper, by going back, to what words they use. I mean, going back to the imagery and the kind of world, the imagery and the words that they use, the names that they use, the kind of world that the imagery that is encapsulated in those words causes you to visualize, which is the world that the speaker of that particular language would be geared at wanting to see, build, wanting to see materialize, wanting to see flourish. So therefore, the academia, as far as I'm concerned, is culture specific. It's not neutral, it's culture specific, is rooted in the, Athenian, cultural asili, and with the popularity of the Platonic thought, the emergence of the Platonic thought, above, all the thoughts, around which other schools, were built, were organized, is the one that became the epistemological mantle of Europe, and by which every learning institution, was established in the world by Europeans wherever they went. All learning institutions became academic institutions. And then we are asking ourselves, what does learning, scholarship, research, dissemination of knowledge have to do with a culture-specific imagery that the name of that particular epistemological space encapsulates? If this is not cultural imperialism, if this is not cultural arrogance exerted, so then we came up with what we call, as African, independent African scholars. This conceptualization was not done in an academic space. This conceptualization was not done in a space, of, peer reviews, in a space of, articles being published in academic journals somewhere. So this conceptualization is a conceptualization that was done in a community environment, which is outside, of the academia. Myself and, my circle of like-minded, like-spirited, friends, individuals, brothers, sisters, we came up with what we call the TEHUTI epistemological conceptual framework to represent the African indigenous knowledge stream as being, peculiarly African, and by its peculiarity necessitating for a space that is independent, that is sovereign, that is separate, that is separate from any other space, to be established as, to give it, as a stream of knowledge, a separate stream of knowledge, an institutional framework. So we could not by cultural definition, locate the epistemological progression of African indigenous knowledges, within the academia, because the academia is the refined and perfected, state of something whose cultural asili is traceable, through history. And the academia, we contend, as far as the dynamics of, domination, cultural domination, racial domination, ethnic domination are concerned, at the area of cognitive or cogno-spiritual domination, we see the establishment of the academic spaces on the invaded, land mass, on the invaded African indigenous soil, as a declaration of epistemic war, as a declaration or the meeting out, of epistemic terror and violence, especially when the denigration and malignment of African knowledges became the resultant, effect of the establishment, of academic institutions. I am not saying Eurocentric, academic institutions. I'm saying academic institutions because by etymology, by cultural and asili, the term academic has the supposition of, being inherently Eurocentric. So I'm going to be using the term academic and TEHUTI, as antonyms for the purpose, of this discourse, as being, at polar positions, for the purposes of discourse. I represent the TEHUTIC. Now, let me explain why TEHUTIC. TEHUTIC is a neologism that we developed from the ancient Egyptian word, Kemetic word, found in what was called in the Nile Valley in ancient Egypt, Ra'em Kamt, or the language, of the Kemetui, who were the Kemetians, the ancient inhabitants, of what is today called Egypt, although on a different landmass, not confined to a country called Egypt today. It was way bigger than that. So in their language, NETER, we find the name in one of the glyphs which has been deciphered, to sound, as TEHUTI. TEHUTI was a NETER. A NETER is a primal life force. There were different primal life forces that most Egyptologists, Europeans who were studying ancient Egypt, using the spectacles, of Europe, cultural, religious, philosophical, they translated Neteru, the Neteru, as the gods, but it did not mean the gods. Then you had primal life forces or primal forces of nature, Neteru. Then the term Neteru literally, directly, would mean nature. Neteru, those primal forces. I mean, in my language, we call that Sidimu. In my Sesotho language, my Nguni, brethren, would call those forces of nature amadlozi, not ancestors, but these are non-human, forces of nature. These are cosmic entities, forces of nature. Then the ancient our ancient Egyptian ancestors called them the NETER. So each NETER represented a particular aspect, of life. So when it came to knowledge, writing, assessing, judging, recording, wisdom, you had TEHUTI, a NETER called TEHUTI. This particular NETER then represented those, aspects, of the ancient, Kemetic life or the ancient Egyptian life. Within their cosmology, they imagined, representing that aspect, they imagined a NETER, anthropomorphically, they imagined a NETER anthropomorphically to be a being with a falcon head, called TEHUTI, that represented, this is not a god, these were not gods. Within African spiritual cosmologies, there is no God concept, but that's for another day. Or during question time, that a question, a question, you feel free to ask a question, what did I mean, within African spiritual cosmologies, we don't deal with the God concept. So Egyptologists, European Egyptologists, then grossly mistranslated the NETER, concept as meaning the gods. So now, TEHUTI was a NETER among the NETER, representing writing, assessing, teaching, wisdom, knowledge, and many other, epistemological, aspects, in the learning, in the learning circle of the ancient, Kemetic life, ancient Egyptian life. So, and we reasoned, if we have such a distinct cosmological depiction, mythologically packaged, of knowledge, writing, teaching, it means then we have a cultural imagination through which the space of research, scholarship, learning, is expressed and represented. And then if we are to come up giving effect, to the African autonomous thought, if we are to come up with our own, as African people, if we are to come up with our own epistemological conceptual framework, it will befit us to also invoke our cultural imagination by drawing from one of our, ancient spiritual cosmologies. Now, we drew from Kemet. We drew from ancient Egypt. Why ancient Egypt? Because it is the only African civilization which with vastly, discoverable, archaeological evidence. So we draw from that. It is easily the historicity of, what was taking place there is easily historically and archaeologically ascertainable by, through the vast array, of, artifacts that are found there, inscriptions that are found there, and the script, that, that experts in linguistics, were able to decipher. So that is the only reason. It serves that particular, purpose. It serves that function. And it also has, a psychodynamic to it, to instill in the debased and made inferior people through miseducation and diseducation, to imbue them, with a sense of pride. I mean, through the positive history narrative that, this is the greatness, from whence you come. Scholarship, learning, research, knowledge, education is not foreign to you. You even had in your ancient spiritual cosmologies imageries that actually talked to that phenomenon. So now we said we are not going to incline ourselves academically in our engagement with knowledge that is geared at restoring the African personhood. Because now this hegemonic epistemology that is irrelevant, to the African has culturally misoriented the African, has disoriented, the African consciousness, and the African conveys, their life, from the place of dislocation, which is virtual non-existence, because you are doomed. I mean, you are bound, to malfunction if you have your life conveyed from the place of dislocation, because you are culturally misoriented and you have your consciousness disoriented. So for the process of recentering to begin, we have to have the conceptual framework, that guides the reshifting, of, the epistemological geography. Because our plane of existence was redesignated by imposition in epistemological geography. When you look at the social systems that are built throughout the world, it's all applied knowledge. So if the knowledge that we imbibe in academic institutions does not respond to the promptings and yearnings of a people who are its recipients, in this case, I'm referring to African people being recipients of academic knowledge. What you are doing as an academic institution is you engage in what one of the prominent African-centered psychologists, he's late though, Dr. Bobby E. Wright, I would like to quote, you engage in what is called menticide. In my work, not yet published, called Unshackle, Stepping on Toes, a case for the reorientation of the African consciousness, I call academic institutions Urugu menticide camps. In my first book, Up You Mighty Race, I call them Euroversities, because I don't find anything universal. But I see cultural, specificities linking knowledge that is being disseminated in these institutions to a particular cultural milieu. It's not neutral, it's not innocent. Now, Dr. Bobby E. Wright, when he defines menticide, he defines it. Now, I'm doing this, I'm sharing this so as to make emphasis that delineates a distinction between mere brainwash and menticide. Menticide is not mere brainwash, but I like how Dr. Bobby E. Wright puts it here in his article called Menticide, the Ultimate Threat to the Black Race. And I quote, this was published in 1978. And I quote, "In view of the above, the Black race is presently facing an enemy whose method of destruction is without any historical precedent, namely menticide, which is defined as deliberate and systematic destruction of an individual or group's mind." This is menticide. Now, how does he distinguish menticide from mere brainwashing? He further goes on to say, menticide differs in theory and practice from concepts, e.g. brainwashing, in that its ultimate aim, that is menticide, its ultimate aim is the extermination of an entire race, whereby brainwashing is primarily used to convert individuals or groups to a cause or belief, close quote. So what has been done to the epistemologically dominated is not simply, brainwashing. As epistemological, domination through, hegemonic epistemologies has had an effect of cultural misorientation on its domination, subjects. We were not merely converted, to a particular belief, but we have heard our entire mental universe wiped out, because you disconnect us from our asili, from our essence, from that which informs our very cosmic vibrations within, our existential locus. Now, if you disconnect us from that, you are wiping the entire mental universe of an African, out. You are wiping it out. You cause it to disappear. And then an African without the mental universe that is conveyed, through consciousness that has relevant epistemological content. An African without that becomes a mere fungible existentially, a mere disposable existentially, something that cannot locate itself in time and space. Because knowledge also affects the orientation of consciousness. Because now it's part of the contents of consciousness. Consciousness has contents. So the TEHUTIC epistemological conceptual framework then we formulated to look at the academia not as an innocent space of learning, but as a culture specific and culture-oriented epistemological, paradigm. And we locate that, in the streets, of Greece in Athens. So it's where the TEHUTIA, is coming in as a paradigm of the African indigenous knowledge stream, which contains nuggets, solutions, outlooks that are geared at solving African people's peculiar problems, helping African people meet their peculiar needs. Because education, if it is to be meaningful, it has to be for a specific reason. I mean, if I acquire knowledge, in order for us to know if what has been acquired is knowledge, it has to be linked to a particular need that became a precondition for its acquisition. Other than that, if there is no real need to be served, what you have acquired is not knowledge. You have simply imbibed abstractions that you are going to regurgitate. And by and large, that is what we find academic, mind, as opposed to a TEHUTIC mind, where emphasis is on getting, what you have studied, what you have learned, functionalized. If it cannot be instantaneously demonstrated, to functionality, then it's not knowledge. If it's a mere abstraction, that engages your reasoning instrumentalities in a circumlocution, of abstract ideas, and there is no connection to reality to demonstrate how this is to function and to serve what need, then that is not knowledge. And then even by dictionary definition, that is what academic means. I checked, dictionary defines academic. Now, I have earlier on shared, the etymology of the term academia and its variants, academic, academy. So I have shared the etymology. I've shared about the etymology of the term, but the dictionary definition I checked, the last time I checked, in the dictionary, academic meant, as an adjective, academic meant theoretical without practical application or devoid of practical application. I remember Mama Marimba Ani said something to the effect that academic means divorced from life. So it's where the TEHUTI, comes in, to herald, the rise of the African autonomous thought, giving impetus to an African to exact themselves, to the world as sovereigns. But it has to begin with, the African autonomous thought being given the latitude to find, a conceptual framework that would, see it finding its full, institutional fullness. The African autonomous thought has to have institutional fullness. It has to reach institutional fullness. If the African autonomous thought cannot reach institutional fullness, autonomous thinking then becomes a mere abstraction, becomes a mere, what one of my brothers calls wishology, intellectual wishology. Because now, if I think autonomously, if I have intellectual sovereignty, then that has to reach institutional fullness. It has to materialize into an institution with systems running it, with processes for facilitation of systems running that particular institution. But the recourse must at all times, be given to the paradigmatic foregrounding, to this particular conceptual framework, to knowledge. So yeah, so this is where the TEHUTI comes in. It's how we conceptualize TEHUTI. And in my book, Up You Mighty Race, I don't have it with me here. But I have somewhere something that is quoted from that book that pertains to what I'm presenting, at the moment. From the chapter in the book, or the section in the book called The New Black Order Dictionary of Education, Seizing the Power to Define. TEHUTI, an important NETER, in brackets and inverted commas, God. Remember I said the Neteru were not gods. In ancient African spiritual cosmologies, we don't have the God concept. TEHUTI is an important NETER in Kemet, that is ancient Egypt, associated with writing, knowledge, and wisdom. Second word is TEHUTIA. Now, this is my neologism. A neologism that I introduced. TEHUTIA as a noun would mean an environment or community, that is TEHUTIA, an environment or community that is concerned with the pursuit of research, education, and scholarship that is African-centered. An example of a sentence where the noun TEHUTIA can be used is, she spends most of her time in the TEHUTIA, in that space. He is in the TEHUTIA. The same way you say, I'm in the academia, So I'm in the TEHUTIA. The third word, TEHUTICS, another neologism from the name TEHUTI, from the ancient Egyptian name of the NETER of knowledge, wisdom, writing, assessment, judgment. Now, the third neologism is TEHUTICS, is a noun, is another noun. TEHUTICS, engaging in TEHUTICS. TEHUTICS means activities, studies, or pursuits relating to the amassing of research and production and or dissemination of knowledge that is African-centered, geared at establishing African-centered education. When you do this, when you do all of these, you engage in TEHUTICS. Another noun is TEHUTIC. A TEHUTIC is a person who engages in activities, studies, or pursuits relating to the amassing of research and production and or dissemination of knowledge that is African-centered, geared at establishing African-centered education. Sentence example, Dr. John Hendrik Clark is a TEHUTIC of the highest eminence. Now, you also have the word TEHUTIC as an adjective. It means of, or belonging to, or classified under TEHUTICs. Sentence example, she has a brilliant TEHUTIC mind. Another sentence example, they are engaging in a TEHUTIC discussion or debate. He is presenting a TEHUTIC paper. Yeah, so yes, I felt I needed to take you through this, so as you have a deeper insight when some of these words I use throughout our conversation. You do not get spellbound. Yeah, so I shall end here. I shall end here.
So I have like 7 pages of notes again, so.
Yo, Susie.
I know. And like I want to continue conversations, but I'm not going to do that because I want students to kind of jump in, and if we don't get them tonight, we will get to them in July in Pretoria.
Sure.
And I think for students, please don't shortcut yourself about the question you want to ask. I told you that it took me probably 4 presentations and listening for me to understand the TEHUTI. So, like, really be direct with your question. And Brother Itu knows that. He knows that he owes to explain, and he is always ready. And he knows that there's a lot of things that needs to be said in order for anyone who's new into these ideas to get them. There's a lot of context and a lot of, it requires the person who's listening, who's trying to understand this, to ask a question in order for him to go there. That's the only way you can understand this. So you can like ask a question, ask him to rephrase where you want him to rephrase. That's the way so you can get into it. He cannot understand what is it where you might have gotten lost. So please, it's open.
I'm going to start, which might give some insight. And it's like, so I mean, we have talked for so many years, and I have read so much of your stuff. And it's always, like I said, I took like 7 pages of notes, is probably an understatement. And this is like a really elemental question, Itu. And again, Dingani invited us in, so there's like no question that's like silly, right? So towards the end, you were talking when you were really kind of describing kind of like the etymological kind of notions of the TEHUTIA and a TEHUTIC, and you know, and so you used the term Dr. So-and-so is a TEHUTIC, and I think you said Dr. John somebody is a TEHUTIC.
Yes, Dr. John Hendrik Clark, yes.
Is that like an oxymoron? Because the notion of the doctorate, the PhD, is conferred by the academy. And the TEHUTI is kind of, you know, on early you kind of said, you know, consider them like on the opposite kind of space, right? That this is the, you know, the academy has engaged in epistemological genocide, essentially. So is that like actually possible? Because that, you know, or am I coming from such a Western centric space that I'm only very narrow in my definition of what a doctor is? Because that also could be really kind of rooted just in the academy. There could be so many other doctors of so many other things. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. Let me explain. It appears to be, you know, an oxymoron, but it's not an oxymoron. Dr. John Hendrik Clark was an academic. He was an academic, you know, he lectured at Hunter's College, and he received, you know, his doctorate at Hunter's College. So he was a doctor by academic standards.
Okay.
So he, while in that process, while in that space, started engaging, you know, in a critique. He was a doctor. He had that conferred on him, you know, by, you know, academic procession, you know, of the occupation, you know, that he was in, because he was an academic, he was in the academic space. So TEHUTICs, you know, a TEHUTIC can be someone who is, I myself, you know, am, you know, in a particular, you know, area of practice, you know, which area is institutionalized, like other areas are institutional, like other areas of practice are institutionalized, you know, to support the hegemony. I do not have illusions, but I am working for an institution that is not African-centered, an institution that is not under an African-centered, you know, indigenous government. So Dr. John Hendrik Clark had a Urugu menticide camp, you know, you call them universities and colleges, had a Urugu menticide camps, you know, confer the doctor title on him. He had doctorate conferred on him. If you are a professor yourself, it is what, you know, you would have, you know, had conferred on you, you know, by academic standards. So we cannot take that away from you.
Okay.
So, but he had such a TEHUTIC mind. He had a TEHUTIC mind. He is one of the individuals that I would say was not handicapped by academitis, although in the academic space. I know there are many people who are like that, you know, in the academic space who do not suffer, you know, from academitis, who are not, you know, intellectually handicapped by academitis. So yes, you know, it's not an oxymoron. Dr. John Hendrik Clark was a doctor by academic standards. In the TEHUTIC, you know, epistemological, you know, paradigm, the logical, you know, conclusion to us establishing our own institutions, ethics, you know, rules, you know, around whatever principles, mores, you know, would be informing the running of that particular institution. We would be foregrounded in our culture. We would be foregrounded in concepts that words in our indigenous languages, you know, would be doorways to. We do not have in our culture doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So we do not have professor. We do not even have knowledge levels of, you know, education standardized, you know, the way in the academic, you know, framework of accreditation. You know, education has been standardized and hierarchized. We don't have, we have our own, you know, indigenous, you know, criteria, you know, to measure, you know, progression, epistemological progression of people. So we do not have those. We do not have those. One of the swipes I take swipe on some individuals who, you know, declare themselves African-centered, you know, scholars, who walk around with these professor doctor titles, but they mock, you know, people who walk around, Africans who walk around with titles such as reverend, bishop, pastor, and say, you know, he walks around with a colonial title. Mm-hmm. He's a coon, you know, he walks around with a colonial title. I mean, what is a bishop? What is a pastor? What is a reverend? We don't have such in Africa, but he is Professor so-and-so. He is Dr. so-and-so. So that is an oxymoron. That is an oxymoron. So if John Hendrik Clark, you know, were to do such a thing, you know, I would conclude that he's either a hypocrite, you know, or, you know, an imbecile. I mean, how do you do that?
Right.
By occupation, he was a doctor, you know, as an academic, being in an academic space, you know, by profession, by occupation. So to say Dr. John Hendrik Clark is a TEHUTIC of the highest eminence, it's not an oxymoron.
Thank you.
If I'm a cop, for instance, if I'm a cop and I rank as Colonel. I will be Colonel Itumeleng Makale.
Right, that would be your occupational rank.
Yeah, Colonel Itumeleng Makale. So that does not in any way
Diminish the
no,
philosophical
it does not.
positionality. Okay.
It's not.
Can you
Yeah.
see the chat? Itu?
Can I see that again? I wanted to look at it. I saw something, but it.
Or I can read it.
Can you read it? Yes.
Yeah, this is from Abrar. And Abrar says, you mentioned that TEHUTI is concerned with the pursuit of community and research that is African-centered. Do you think that African-centered knowledge needs to be African-led? That's a good question.
Do I think what?
African-centered knowledge needs to be African-led.
Yes, African-centered knowledge needs to be African-led. Definitely needs to be African-led. I mean, it's only Africans who are uniquely positioned, grounded, to understand and interpret the African spirit. Because knowledge with us also is a spirit. It's a sacred thing. Knowledge is a spirit which has intelligibly been, presented, in a word form. So an African is better positioned to lead in what flows from his asili, from his essence. You can only be an authority on what flows from your essence.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a maybe weird question. Wait, can you hear me?
No holds barred. No holds barred.
Oh,
Yes. Let me hear your weird question.
okay. I hope you can hear me fine. My
Yes, I can hear
computer
you
is
audibly.
just freaking out. Okay, great.
I can hear you audibly. And your name, please?
My name is Mahima.
Oh, yes.
Mahima.
Yes.
So earlier you mentioned that indigenous people, and specifically Africans, people are recipients of knowledge. And I just had a random thought when you said that. Like, do you think there is like a weird disconnect almost, I guess, between indigenous people being the recipients of knowledge that they themselves have made or have engaged like within their history, but now it's just being, shaped in a way for it to be like more Eurocentric or to be with Euro English words and ideas and stuff like that. Like, do you think that there's like that weird disconnect? Because like sometimes I feel like that when I'm learning about something or when something new is being created and it's being marketed as something, but I kind of look at it sometimes and I'm like, that already exists in an indigenous culture or my indigenous culture. But it's being like like, I don't know how to fully put it into words, but it's being like reconstructed and reformulated to fit the Euro centric ideas, needs, values, etc. Do you feel like that sometimes?
There are non-African concepts that are being used as reappropriations, unqualified reappropriations of African concepts with which no affinity, exists. Like, for instance, remember one of the examples that I made. Okay, I'll make an example, from what I alluded to earlier. And I said during question time, feel free to ask me on that. I said, we in ancient Africa, in our spiritual cosmologies, we never dealt with, we didn't have the God concept. We didn't have the God concept.
Mhm.
But you'd hear African people today use, the term God, to refer to a particular African phenomenon. They would say, the African gods, the gods want this and that, the gods, referring to what we call in my Sesotho language, Sidimo, which are non-human, cosmic forces, or elements, or energies. Those are not gods. Those are not beings. Because the God concept is anthropomorphic. It was introduced as anthropomorphic, by its inceptional reality. As to how it was introduced as anthropomorphic. So when you say my ancestors are gods, for instance, you are not presenting to me, a word that is a doorway to a concept that I had already had. You are talking about gods, but your God concept is not in affinity, with, my ancestor, concept. Mm-hmm. What I refer to as Badimu, in my Sesotho language, is not in any way in conceptual affinity with what is called God or gods. So that is what the frustration that you are talking about. Yes, there may be some conceptual commonalities, nuanced, I think, but what is European is European. What is African is African. Mm-hmm. What is European is European. What is African is African. I will make another example. We do not have in my language, we do not have neighbor, the neighbor concept. We don't have that concept of neighbor. We have Makelwane. My Nguni brethren are saying Makelwane. My Basotho people are saying Moahisani. So this means a person who engages in ukakana or ahana with you, not simply, a guy in the hood next door or front opposite, or, someone who stays, in the next street. So it means a person you intimately and affectionately bond, you enlighten each other, you build each other's character, you stand for each other, in times, of troubles. You engage in ukakana, ahana, ahisan. So that is not neighbor. Now, when I speak English, and there are many, indigenous concepts that I may not be able to adequately express. Speaking a foreign language has that limitation.
Right. Yes, it does.
And now when you speak to the speaker of that foreign language in their language, they may not, get, the depth, of, what is meant by what you express. They may not, gain access to what you have conceptualized, in your choice of the ways that you use to express what you express. What you conceptualized could be miscarried, linguistically.
Yeah.
Because you use a tongue that does not have the imagery that the concept that foregrounds, the expression, has. Right. So you won't be able to adequately convey what you have conceptualized, in your indigenous deep thought.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Thank
in
you.
reality, it also means that the truth of what Makhelwane means by using neighborhood has been exterminated.
Yes,
It's gone.
it's
Like
gone. When you say
like
neighborhood,
it's
neighbor,
not
you're talking about
brainwashed,
something
it's
else.
gone. It's
You're
gone.
talking about something else. Like,
And
for
the
instance,
children that are born now using that word, it's still in Zulu or it's still in Sotho, it's still in an African language. But the English or the European conceptualization of what this means has changed. The African root of it is wiped out.
yep,
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I was, that's like what I mean, is like how indigenous populations are being recipients of knowledge from, right, like these, like I am, right, in these like universities or Eurocentric academic spaces, and I'm being given information, but obviously that information is being seen through, expressed through, and especially when it comes to like talking about histories of people, like histories and cultures of people, like these concepts and things, sometimes they're talking to me about my own culture, right? And then they're explaining things to me, but they're making it almost in a way that it shifts my view. Like if I didn't know the previous indigenous parts that I knew already, I would be given this information, this knowledge, and I would be equating it then to the same Eurocentric value, which then continues to erase that indigenous knowledge itself. Like if I wasn't already connected to it.
that's correct.
Yeah, like I think that's a way better way of putting it. Thank you, Professor.
It's not
But like
coming from the same asili.
Yes, it's not coming from the same asili, and so because of that, it's like you feel like a disconnect, especially because you might still have some of that indigenous asili, like you still have a little bit of it, and so
Yes,
when someone else is explaining it,
you still have.
it's like,
Yeah. You still have. You are made by, calibrations of what you cosmically vibrate to. So your cosmic, calibrations will gravitate you to wanting to find linguistic outlets to express them, So maybe that's why a foreign speaker of a particular language often gets very animated in how they they use that. I know the way I use English, for instance, most of the time I use English language very unconventionally, and I'm doing it consciously so, because I can't help but direct my expressions, sentence constructions, in accord, with the indigenous concept I want to express. It has to serve, whatever language I speak has to serve that purpose. So I'll inevitably, speak it, unconventionally.
right.
The original speaker of that language may not even understand what I'm saying.
Right.
At times.
Okay. Yeah. That was like my thought, or like my kind of line of thinking.
Let me make you another example. About 2 months ago, I was in a barber shop. This is what I experienced. I was in a barber shop here in South Africa, in our country. I'm in a barber shop. The barber is a man from Ghana. So I have been learning, I've been teaching myself, some basic Akan, Twi language, spoken in Ghana, spoken by most people in Ghana. So now we started engaging in a conversation with this man, the barber was cutting my hair, and I asked him about abusum. There's an account tree, a word called abusum. Abusum means ancestral, spirits, cosmo ancestral spirits. That's what abusum means. Now I asked him, what is abusum? And he asked, Nanyad, where did you learn that? Then I said, no, I'm teaching myself. I've started the process of teaching myself your language. And then he said to me, abusum, means lesser gods. That's what he said abusum means. He said abusum means lesser gods. And I asked him, what do you mean lesser gods? Lesser gods, lesser than what? Gods lesser than what? No, lesser than the Most High God, the Creator. And I asked him, are you sure abusum are gods? Are abusum gods? Are they gods, really? Does abusum mean gods in your language? Yeah, idols. Is this the Akan tree language? Yes, it's the Akan tree language. Now, before the encounter with Christian missionaries, did your ancestors call abusum idols? What is the Akan tree word for idol? He didn't have it. He could only express it in English. He could say abusum are idols. But I asked him, what is an idol in the Akan tree language, in your language? He didn't have a word for that. And I said, you define abusum, an Akan tree word, by a word that you don't find in the language from whence you find the word abusum. It does not make sense to me. Then it means somebody came and taught you their language and told you, no, these are idols. These are idols. So and so is the only true God. So and so, these are idols. Because now you see, like I said, we never dealt with the God concept. The people who brought the God concept, into our culture and spirituality. When I say we never dealt with the God concept, I don't mean we were atheists.
Right, of course. Yeah.
It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean I'm not an atheist. I'm not an atheist. If you were to ask me, do you believe in God?
Right.
I won't be able to answer that question to your satisfaction because I don't also deal with belief.
Right.
I don't believe in anything because in my Sesotho language, we don't have a word for belief. It's either you know or you don't.
Right.
It's either you know or you don't. There's metaphysical knowledge. We acknowledge the metaphysics, but in that epistemic realm of metaphysics, it's still knowledge. You are engaging, you're engaging in knowledge. Dealing with metaphysics is another, act of knowing at that particular, epistemic plane or level. But we don't deal with belief. It's either you know or you don't know.
Right.
How you know is something is a complete different story, but it's either you know or you don't know. Belief, we don't have a word for that. We have a word, hoholwa. Hoholwa. Hoholwa is a word which means, I trust that such and such is the case. I trust that my Mahima, is gonna do 1, 2, 3, 4. Now this is predicated on my knowledge of Mahima.
Right.
I don't believe Mahima is gonna do 1, 2, 3.
Right.
I trust Mahim, and trust is predicated on experience. So we don't have the word belief. The word we have, holwa, means that. Now, the missionaries took our word dumela, which means to align, to agree, and used it to represent faith, belief.
Okay. Yeah.
But dumela in my language does not mean believe. It means to align, to agree. That's what it means. But when a Mosotho Christian speaks today and expresses and makes a declaration of faith in Sesotho language, they say, I dumela in Jesus Christ. But to dumela is to align, is to be in alignment with, is to be in agreement with. That's what to dumela means. But they captured that word, you know, and made it and gave it a Christian theological adaptation and strip it off, you know, of its meaning. It's indigenous, it's African indigenous Sesotho meaning.
Yeah, perfect.
Yep.
That answered my question perfectly.
No, thanks, Mahima. Susie?
I am here. Does anyone else, somebody, other students? There's like so much to unpack and discuss.
Would you, Brother Itu, summarize what is the plan of this recentering and reorientation? How does it get to African children? How does it get to the community? Because at the moment, it's still being like you guys are building it. And talk about, has it started to get to some people, and what are the challenges of getting it to disseminate it? Like, where should it begin? Does it start at the church? Where should it start?
It has actually started. I mean, the space that we are in at the moment, you know, is one of those spaces. There's different spaces, you know, there's different, you know, conversational spaces where this is taking place. Well, the TEHUTI, you know, is still at its conceptual, you know, stage. We participate, you know, in webinars, in seminars, in platforms, you know, such as these ones. We get, you know, in dialogues, you know, with scholars in the academia. We exchange with like-minded, you know, scholars, you know, from other parts of the world. Like currently, I am in an exchange, in a scholarly exchange with you know, Professor Amamazama, and you know, Dr. Marimba Ani. So Dr. Marimba Ani is based in Atlanta. There's a community newspaper that, you know, she's the, you know, editor of, that she has invited me over to write, you know, to contribute, you know, content to. And they have a model also that, you know, we are studying to see, because among the programs that they run, Mama Professor Marimba Ani is the leader of the African sovereignty movement. So they have a vast array, you know, of programs and projects. So but they prioritize children. So we are also, studying studying to benchmark, what projects, what programs, to replicate this site. And it's not easy, to be quite honest with you, for this new, thought, to find, inroads into our people's mental universe. It's not easy. And you asked a question. Another question you asked was, this recentering, what is the end game? What is the output end of this? What is the output end envisaged? The output end envisaged is the emergence of an African who lives as a sovereign, an African who lives as a person who authentically, express, manifest, exacts their asili. Now, there's a power, dynamic, to recentering, because power, is a sovereignty, imperative to acquire. We cannot be sovereign except, we have power. So the recentering, process is not an apolitical process. It's very political, because it also questions, the political hegemony, because a whole lot of, red tapes, that have been put, as hindrance, to the work of recentering, are because of, the hegemonies, the political hegemonies, that are in charge. The recentering process, the recentering back to our cultural, spiritual, intellectual, philosophical, educational, genesis points as African people. It has to happen within the context of acquiring power.
So, like, may you speak for this movement? What does it feel about South African democracy?
About South African democracy. South African,
yeah, because now we have our Black people are in charge, and
Black people are in charge. Now, let me give you the background to what you call South African democracy. South Africa has always been democratic. South Africa was democratic even before 1994. And the struggle that the indigenous people of South Africa engaged in was never about democracy, was never about achieving democracy, because there was democracy in South Africa even, during, resistance wars, both frontier and interior, resistance wars against, the British and people of Dutch descent. Both of whom, met in 1910 and made truce to say, let's stop fighting each other, because they were fighting, among themselves also, the British and the people of Dutch descent. They were fighting among themselves, over who should, invade, the entire land, and enslave the indigenous people. They made truce and say, let's form a union government and subdue, the natives. And then the Republic of South Africa was born in 1910. The Republic of South Africa was born in 1910 as a creature of the British, statute. an act of British Parliament, was promulgated. There's the resultant effect of which was the establishment of the Republic of South Africa. The name of that statute was South Africa Act, to unite the British and the people of Dutch descent called the Boers. Now, all this was done, to the exclusion of the natives. It's a state that they established, that they imposed. It's a polity that they imposed, that they established and imposed on, our soil, on us as the natives, and they use this polity to pillage, our natural resources, and subjugated us systematically. And they were placing each other, in charge through democratic means, but it was a democratic state that was anti-Black. It was a democratic state that was anti-African. So African people's, African people's wars of resistance were not, about, democracy as, an end game, but they were about reconquest of land and re-establishment of African sovereignty on the land after the land has been reconquered from the invaders who established a state called the Republic of South Africa. The Republic of South Africa is not our state as the indigenous people, and to say it is our state is to say the Republic of South Africa. Not only this goes for any so-called African nation state, for that matter. To say these colonial constructs are our states is to falsify, the African liberation struggle, history, narrative. You are falsifying it. You are falsifying our liberation struggle history when you say these are our states. I mean, you hear people saying that, our country, in our country, and these are the natives, but they are referring to polities that were, established on their soils after they were displaced, on their soils after these soils were invaded by the imposters who came to invade their land. They established these policies and imposed them on the natives. So the end game of a true liberation struggle for me, if we are serious about ascending back to our former glory as the natives of this land, should be the dismantling of these, colonial polities. Reconquest of the land and the dismantling of these colonial, polities must be wound up, must be dismantled, must be collapsed, and we re-establish our sovereignty as African people. What happened in South Africa in 1994? Black people were co-opted into the imposter state that was established in 1910 by the British and the people of Dutch descent, who simply said to the natives, "Oh, you want to vote? Is this what you've been fighting for? To vote? Okay, come, you can vote." And every 5 years, we go to the polling stations, we cast votes. Hey, we are free! Hey! When you look at the political, framework, the political organization, model is European proper. The laws in South Africa, African lawyers, attorneys, advocates, judges, magistrates, and law academics still say You know, we in South Africa, our common law is Roman Dutch law with English influence. That's our common law. But when the people of Dutch descent came here in 1652, they are the ones who transplanted Roman Dutch law to South Africa as what they had in common with the Romans. People who studied people who studied law, then the Roman law and legal history part, in the law degree curriculum, they should know that there's where Roman law, because Roman law is made the Magna Carta, of legal systems, in the world, where law was first codified, which is a lie. So now from Roman law, as Rome, expanded its empire, when Rome went to, expand its empire to also, invade, Netherlands, there was a reception period when Romans were imposing Roman law on the nations that they subjected their empire. This law had to undergo the law that Romans transplanted to their colonies had to undergo what was called reception. So in Netherlands, the Dutch filtered Roman law through a dispensation that they called reception period, where they infused Roman law into Dutch law, and then that's what they had in common with the Romans. That hybrid system that was born was what they had in common, what the Dutch had in common with the Romans. When the Dutch came to South Africa, they transplanted Roman Dutch law and they said, this is our common law. The natives who are trained in law call that their common law too. And they are neither Roman nor Dutch. Ain't that a joke? I can't hear, my brother. I can't hear.
You don't need to hear anything. I'm just laughing.
Charlie, go ahead.
So, Charlie, yes.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
This might be kind of a long-winded question. There might be some rhetorical questions. I'm just gonna kind of try to talk through and make sure that I've understood everything. So when the discussion started, you told this story, told this story about the etymology of academia, which was really interesting, and I had never known anything about that. How the word academia, the etymology is rooted in this mythology of Greek people, the story of academos, and how academia within itself is inherently has these imageries, this vision that is very rooted in Western culture. And then you countered, paralleled it with TEHUTI and the mythologies within Egypt, and the NETER. And I was wondering what will it look like for TEHUTI to be institutionalized, and how will it look? And I also should do more of your readings, and some of this would actually probably be answered if I read some of your readings. How does TEHUTI look institutionalized, not as anti-academia and not just academia, but African? And because I'm sure with the dissemination of academia out of Greece, that flattened, you were talking about the university as not universal, but as Europe, I forget the exact term that you used, but the university is it is a mechanism of European ideology and European hegemony. How, and I'm sure when, sorry, this long-winded, and I don't know if anything that I'm saying is making any sense.
I'm following. Believe you me.
like I'm sure when this like Platonian thought like came out of Greece, that it like flattened philosophies that existed throughout the continent of Europe. Like, what will TEHUTI spreading across the continent of Africa look like to make sure that it's truly Pan-African and truly universal, and not just shifting like a European hegemony to an African hegemony?
It's simply African people having their knowledge stream reaching institutional fullness. Because when you look at academic institutions, European knowledge stream has reached institutional fullness in these institutions. Psychology is called psychology, it's simply psychology. And we know it's not universal, it's European psychology, but it's not called such. Sociology is simply sociology. But we know it's not universal, it's European sociology, but it's not called such. So, and many other, you know, disciplines. And then you'd have, you know, within the European, you know, epistemological empire, you know, a cubicle, a small cubicle at the corner there, what we call epistemological Bantustan, established for African studies as a department of African studies. A department, can we imagine? A department within this huge, this vast European epistemological empire. And within the African Studies Department, you have sub-disciplines to mainstreamer disciplines that are European proper. You'd have African psychology as a sub-discipline under psychology, which is European. Psychology is European. You'd have African theology, which is a sub-discipline to theology, which is European. So, which the TEHUTI would be a separate space, like College of Humanities, but College of African Studies, but the College of African Studies, yes, yes. Now, a College of African Studies, I'm answering to, I have seen a question here on the screen. Yes, College of Humanities, College of African Studies. You cannot say College of Humanities and College of African Studies. You cannot compress everything African there is to know under a college. When you have everything European there is to know as a university, and everything African there is to know, you confine that to a college within a university. College of African Studies, Department of African Studies. That shows European epistemological arrogance. You can't have that. You can't have that. So the academia is simply not a space for African people to educationally have the African asili, the African essence encapsulated. We can't have our essence encapsulated in the academic space. We need a different, a separate, you know, epistemological space in which to institutionalize our knowledges as a separate stream. Academic institutions must not be tampered with. Nothing should be decolonized there. What are you decolonizing there? Are you decolonizing Aristotle? Aristotle must be, how do you decolonize Aristotle? How do you do that? Leave Aristotle. Aristotle is Aristotle. Europeans came with Aristotle. Europeans came with Sigmund Freud. Leave Sigmund Freud as Sigmund Freud. What are you gonna do? How do you do that? Academic institutions' curricula are Eurocentric simply because these institutions were established by Europeans, giving European knowledge stream institutional fullness. Simple, basic, and that should be understood about us. It's something that has it, you know, it's something, it's simply what has to be understood about what we are, you know, postulating as the TEHUTI. I have to study psychology, you know, from the African-centered, you know, paradigm. And it has to, I'm making an example here with psychology. And it has to be in such a way that it is as though, you know, I had never encountered the Stuart Mills and the Freud Sigmund of this world. It must simply be us looking the other way. When you look at, you know, European knowledge stream, everything that is there, how they have theorized, what they define as human, they looked at Europe as though Europe is the world. They looked the other way and were to themselves. But it is epistemic arrogance to come and present knowledges that were conceptualized that way to other people as though they are universal. As far as knowledge is concerned, there's nothing universal. Not even science. No, science is not universal. Can I make an example? I'll make an example. Science is not universal. My third born, my daughter, she's not my last born, my third born. She's 15 this year. She turned 15. She's not my last born, my third born. She's not my last. She turned 15. She turned 15 on the 7th of April. We share the same star sign, Aries. So I remember when she was a baby, then there was this other time when I took her to the clinic for checkup. And then they were the sisters, the nurses there were really complaining about her weight, that her weight was not satisfactory at all, you know. It was below, you know, what is considered normal weight, you know. And yeah, we should do something, you know, we should now they inquired about the family diet, and I said plant-based. No. You must mix peanut butter with, you know, raw eggs and milk and palm milk, and the baby must eat that so that the baby can pick up weight. Really? You know what? Do you know what I did? I went to study World Health Organization's baby growth baby growth percentiles, what is called baby growth percentiles. And the research studies, the recent research studies that have been done, you know, on baby growth percentiles, according to WHO, you know, standards, by WHO standards. Now, the baby growth percentiles that were standard were found faulty because the studies were done only the people who were sampled, you know, for that study were children of people who were on a regular diet. People who are on plant-based diet, a study was never conducted to them. I mean, in their sampling methodology, they never considered, you know, people who were on plant-based diet, which is a different culture, right? But now scientific findings were made, findings which are called scientific were made from a study whose sampling method was faulty, because people who live by certain dietary standards were not among, you know, sampled, you know, groups in the study. Now that was revised, and the baby growth percentiles, you know, were adjusted. The clinic that I took my daughter to had outdated information. Yes, you are right. Science. Yes, Susan, you're right. Science is always
There's
biased.
no like truth. We're always making an assumption. Like even the notion, if we say, all of us can say here, the sun is coming up tomorrow. That's an assumption. You can't say that.
Yes, it is.
Right? And so it's assumptive, but those assumptions are biased based on where you are located, you know, not just physiologically, but, you know, in terms of consciousness and spirituality,
Right.
and, you know, these multiple things. Yet we kind of take a certain type of science as an absolute truth.
Because now you hear people use, you know, the adjective scientific this, scientific that. Yeah, but it's scientific. Huh?
It's all assumptive.
Scientifically speaking, this is the case. This is a fact. It's scientific. It's scientifically proven.
Yeah.
Yes, Mahima. Yes, Mahima. Objective truths don't exist. They don't exist. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
There's this consensus of agreement.
What is
It's
objective?
specific.
Consider what is objective, because what is called science labors under the presumed, you know, objectivity. The assumed objectivity, yes, the assumed objectivity is what is called science, you know, often labors under. What is objectivity? There's objectivity and subjectivity. Now, when you are being objective as opposed to being subjective, how does your mind work? How does your mind work? How does your mind vacillate between subjectivity and objectivity? Because if you are still using your mind in being objective, what is, you see now, it's like now, but they make it seem as though being objective is being intellectually aloof. You suspend subjective engagement, you know, with phenomena, with objects, you know, of reality. No, you can't. I mean, the human mind does not function that way. That is why we have a society of people who approach life schizophrenically. It's because of these twisted notions. These are just abstractions, which cannot, you know, be functionally, you know, demonstrated, to us as to how they work. Yes, Mahima. Yes. So, yep. What a pause. You want me
We
to
want to
continue
continue to
speaking?
give more people the chance to ask questions. Do other people really ask? I know there's there's a lot of people over here. We don't want to let's give them a chance. Do any of you guys have another question?
So in absence of questions, there's this paper. I'll avail it. I'll avail it to you, Susan and Dinga, to share with the students. There's this paper that I co-authored with a friend of mine, a fellow TEHUTI, by the name of Itumeleng Papi D. Dlamini. So it's a concept, paper for the establishment of an institution that is not yet, established. To be a conduit of the TEHUTI project. So now we propose that an institute called MISAW be established. MISAW is MISAW, which stands for Monomotapa Institute for the Study of African-Centered Worldview. Monomotapa Institute for the Study of African-Centered Worldview, MISAW. So Monomotapa is the last name in the pre-colonial, by which, the Southern African region was called. So we felt that this being, the last indigenous name our region was called by, we should, instead of saying South African, we should rather use the word Monomotapa, because it's the last indigenous name by which our region was called. Now, the MISAW concept paper, this is the document. I won't read the whole of it. Towards a radical African-centered revolution, the African reality of knowledge production. It is now decades after the formal abolishment of slavery and colonialism, yet even today, the academia remains the site of European intellectual hegemony built on historic continuity of a single culture. It is also apparent that the academizing of African consciousness reorienting epistemes has reduced such knowledge to an elitist and sterile intellectual sophistry among African scholars. And as such, it has rendered their efforts in knowledge production to non-effect, putting the majority of African people at the margins of the much needed community-based conceptual engagements in ways that occlude the possibility of retrieval of and innovation premised on African-centered epistemologies, with impetus for their rise spiritually and institutionally with regards to family, community, economics, politics, health, science, law, culture, and technology. Over the years, history bears witness, Africa has had a plethora of African-centered, Pan-Africanist, and Black consciousness scholars produced, endorsed, and accredited by Eurocentric learning institutions, which has arguably not done much for the rising of the masses of African people to a revolutionary impetus imbued consciousness. There are still no regular African-centered worldview-based educational programs with institutional fullness in African communities, through which knowledge in areas of history, culture, philosophy, spirituality, cosmologies, politics, and economics can be disseminated. There is still a grossly misguided notion that if it's academic, it's authoritative. And this has had an effect of averting the organic development of the African mind into intellectual independence and maturity and a positive African self-image. How should Africans respond to all this? Informed by the preceding analysis, we believe that there's an urgent need for Africans to wake up to the shocking reality that they live in a world that rotates on an axis of other people's definitions and images about life, and the implication being a mentally, spiritually, culturally absent African existence. In other words, African people living as empty and obliging shells in all areas of people activity, products of a falsified and controlled consciousness through miseducation under European intellectual hegemony. The present paper calls for the establishment of a voluntary, regenerative, African-centered research, disseminating and institutionalizing body called Monomotapa Institute for the Study of African-Centered Worldviews, for the de-academization and reclamation of African-centered knowledges from Eurocentric learning spaces, establishing African-centered communiversities, which will be an antidote to institutions in African communities engaging in falsification of and miseducation on Africanity, and also calling African-centered scholars who fashion within the Eurocentric academic framework to repatriate themselves back to their people and help develop a community-based institutional antithesis to institutionalized African mass miseducation in all areas of people activity. Otherwise, African scholars will remain extensions of Europe. Africa must carve out of its own intellectual trajectory. Africa must carve out of its own intellectual trajectory out of her traditions and based on African civilizations. Then we will not continue to have African scholars who know more about Europe than they appreciate and understand the complexities of African history and culture. The nature and character of MISO. MISO will be an independent study and research organization that is devoted to the rescue, reconstruction, and restoration of African history and culture. As a culturally grounded think tank, MISO will mobilize research resources to find solutions to problems in African communities and thereby impact positively the lives of ordinary people. It is an organization that will provide the opportunity for African people to educate other African people about their culture. Thematics covered by the Institute will include, but not limited to, economics, education, history, politics, African policy, women's studies, health, innovation, and technology. Publications covering these topics will be distributed via articles, books, pamphlets, reports, and newsletters to target audiences in the African communities. In addition, the Institute will host debating and thinking seminars and lectures on these themes. On and on and on and on and on. I can't read the whole thing.
So I know he's dead. If you were reading this and Nelson Mandela was in this video, what do you think he will respond to this?
Who, Tata? Who, Tata?
Yes, yeah, Madiba, Nelson Mandela.
Utata was a humanist. So Utata was an abstract universalist and an abstract humanist. Utata, you know, went ahead of himself by being concerned with forging a humanity melting pot, you know, in South Africa, without having, you know, the race problematic, you know, thoroughly dealt with. He was an idealist. He was a utopianist, a non-racialist utopianist. So Utata was an experiment, a very perfect experiment. Experiment is an experiment, and you cannot say experiment is wrong. Every experiment is good, but he was an experiment that demonstrated to us that what he idolized cannot be done. Cannot be done.
He was like Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you know.
We can free Black people and everything's gonna work.
Yeah, you know. So he's the father of the Rainbow Nation, the nation with no roots. So a nation has to have roots. So the Rainbow Nation has no roots. So then, yeah, I mean, he as an idealist, to the best of his ability, he tried, you know, to the best of his ability, but he was engaging in politics of reformism. He simply wanted to modify it, you know, the white power structure, you know, systems. He was not for, his political discourse was not African centered. He was a leader of, you know, a multiracial political organization, the ANC, which is, you know, a ruling party, you know, at the moment, under the constitution, that when you read the preamble, calls everybody in the past unjust. All of us were unjust. The Constitution of South Africa, you know, calls everybody in the past unjust. Black, white, red, yellow, we were all unjust. All of us were unjust. Because it says, we, the people of South Africa, in the preamble, we, the people of South Africa, having acknowledged the injustices of our past, honor those who helped develop our country. Who? So we, the injustices of our past. And ANC's, you know, political Bible is the Freedom Charter that they adopted in Kliptown in 1955. The preamble of that document, the Freedom Charter, says South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white together. The opening statement to the Freedom Charter. So Mandela was, you know, an icon representing, politics of reformism. He was no revolutionary. If you have listened carefully, you would appreciate that the African-centered paradigm through which we want to engage in a TEHUTIC discourse is very revolutionary. And revolutionary means, overturning, abrogating, invalidating, destroying. That's what it means. In my Sesotho language, we have the word phetoho. Phetoho. When you speak English, you simply translate the word phetoho to change. But phetoho does not mean change. It doesn't simply mean change. Phetoho does not simply mean change with us. When you say change, you translate, the word phetoho inadequately. We have the verb, which is the root to the noun phetoho. The verb is phetola. Phetola means to overturn, meaning change in the Sesotho linguistic thought is always revolutionary. Ukpendula. Ukpendula. In your language, that's what you say, Dinga. And ukpendula is not simply to change. Yes.
I see Mahima's hand, and I'm also looking, maybe we have 2 minutes.
All right.
What if we give Mahima a chance to answer the
Yes.
question, and then maybe we all do the farewell, and just to respect the students' time of the class.
And your time, Itu, it is very late there.
Oh my God, your time is
Like-
even weak.
Like 4 a.m. almost.
Yeah, it's almost 4 a.m.
Yeah.
It's almost 4 a.m. But
Yeah.
what can we do? This is what is practically possible. What can we do? Our time difference. What can we do? You can't have the students, you can't have the students, in the midnight, hours. How do you do that? You can't be with the students in the midnight so as to have me in the morning. It can't. I mean, we can't do
We
that.
don't have a friend like you, man. who can-
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
We don't. Who can come out for no pay, come at this time, woke up at 4 a.m. and talk to students. Like,
I'm doing my peppers. I'm doing my peppers. I don't want to
Mahima, go
repeat.
ahead.
I don't want to repeat.
Mahima and Mia. Shall we start? Mahima, is it okay if we
Yes.
start with Mia?
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Since she hasn't asked me a question before.
Yes, Mia.
I think Mia was giving the thank you
Oh,
and good night the wave.
Oh, it's a hand to say thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Mahima. Thank you. Sorry.
Just a more personal, I guess, or personal opinion kind of question. Do you have a favorite freedom fighter or fighter of independence, either in South Africa or just any African country? Do you have one that you think was engaged in the same kind of TEHUTI and TEHUTIA like knowledge spaces, or someone who wanted to cultivate those same kind of spaces? Maybe someone who you wish was like the leader of South Africa during the 1994 like switch of democracies, instead of Mandela, like someone else that you think would have been better?
I mean, the ones who are, in the mainstream, historical narrative of our liberation struggle, to the best of their ability, they tried, but unfortunately, all of them, especially those who became leaders of, African nation states, that were declared independent, they were engaging in politics of reformism. There was nothing revolutionary about the approach. I mean, I'm including Kwame Nkrumah, the father of Pan-Africanism. He was a reformist. All of them, were reformists because they were co-opted into polities that were, that were neo-colonial constructs. So, like I said with South Africa, that in 1994, with political amnesty, the unbanning of political parties and the democratization, of the natives, to form part of the electoral, processes, to also go to polling stations and cast votes. The Republic of South Africa, which is an Anglo-Boer republic, established by the British and people of Dutch descent in 1910, was not wound up, was not liquidated, and we never had, that done so that we can, reclaim our sovereignty and proclaim, a state, of our own. That did not happen. I mean, when I say our, I mean us, the natives, because the national question, historically, has always been centered around land, and us in our struggle being geared at its reconquest for the re-establishment of our sovereignty, that through invasion by the British and people of Dutch descent, we were robbed of our sovereignty. So all of that did not happen, did not take place. Africa is yet to engage in a proper revolution, in a true revolution. The liberation struggle narrative, has to be corrected. There's a lot of incorrectness that has to be dealt with. Then we ended up cultivating injustices through the deluding legacies of neocolonialism, that were subsequent to the proclaimed, independences of African, nation states that we have today. My take is they should be dismantled. They should be collapsed with all their institutions.
Hey, Susan, and all of you guys, does anyone want to just give a last word, and we do the farewell to Brother Itu?
I will do my best to help you dismantle and burn and overthrow and completely destroy all of the things. I will do my best in whatever way I can.
Yeah. Oh,
that's all I can really do. But I will do what I can.
That's power. Thanks, Mahima. I really appreciate that. You guys have reassured me of my sanity. I really appreciate. Yes, you have reassured me of my sanity. Then this is how I get, incentivized, in these kinds, in these kinds of, speaking engagements. I mean, I'm not as sophisticated as you. I'm not backed, by any impressive, academic arsenal. So
People are scared of you.
the highest qualification obtained is the 12th grade. That's the highest qualification obtained. I'm not backed by any academic arsenal. So when you emit energies with these positive affirmations, it is so sanity reassuring to me, and it means so much. It means a lot.
Many people are scared of you, Brother Itu. I have so many professors who are my friends who are teaching in these huge institutions in the US. I have given them your work, and I've told them we need to talk. They never come back. None of them. Like,
really?
I'm talking about friends who think that they're radical and they're teaching decolonization. I've given them your books, I've given them your article. They never come back. And I know they are scared because what you're saying here will challenge the perspective and the things that they've done and what they've taught. I'm like, I don't want to say any names. I'm talking about people from George Mason, people from UVA, people from VCU, people from all these prestigious universities.
I invited 4 people tonight, and when they read this stuff, they were just like, oh, whoa. And I'm not going to give too much shade, but like from Africana studies. So
Really?
This is not a joke. I'm serious.
no, it's not a joke. I mean, I shared.
These are people that have published work about Africa and South Africa, the politics of it, and everything. They look at your work and they realize that what they've done in their work, what you're saying over here is going to really push them on the edge. They don't want to talk. Some of them are psychologists. I'm talking about African psychologists who are presenting themselves as African psychologists. And it doesn't work. I've been talking about you all the time. At some point, I even asked them if we can invite you.
No, I have people who publish on, kind of abolish the university this side. And we're just like, oh, whoa. So, but who I will, if with your permission, share this conversation, because
Sure.
I think they don't have, they're a little afraid to jump in.
They're silly.
No, feel free to share. Feel free to share, and with the students, who did not make it to link up to this webinar. Feel free to share.
I still cannot forget. Last year when you give a talk, we were at the hotel with the study abroad students.
Yes.
They were with you. They know your name. As we were leaving, they were like, "Who is that guy?" They were with you. They were asking you questions, but they felt like they need to reorient themselves to know who that person is.
That was like such a great conversation, though.
No, that was beautiful. Yes, I still remember. And I also love the space, was kind of intimate.
Oh, it was so good.
And
we got really good pictures. No.
I really wish that you and Kendi Ibram can meet. There's something that has not been done by anyone that Ibram did, that I think you have done more than him, actually. I mean, he's
like in a
like you guys are just
baby
like
steps,
parallel, like just having a conversation together. I will still try to see. He might be scared too.
Yeah, no, man. No, but there's no need to feel scared.
It's not scared. It's not really scared. It's being protective of the work that they've done. and the discussions and the TEHUTI approach, it's so deep that it makes people who've been doing this work in a sort of what does Kendi use? There's an anti-racist in an
It's an
assimilationist way.
assimilationist kind of way. I think it challenges their almost existential position within the academy, even though within their academic work, they try to refute the academy.
It
So-
reminds me of Wainana.
Yeah,
When I read the article of Wainana, How to Talk About Africa,
yeah.
the first time I read it, I threw it away because it was talking about me. All the work that I've done teaching, all the work that I've done teaching, it was hard to confront myself.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But I went back and I read it again, and
Oh.
I read back and I meditated, and I told myself, like, yeah, this is you.
Yeah.
This is how you've been thinking, and he transformed. So it's very difficult to confront what you called fetula.
Yeah.
Petuo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Petu. So
Not
hard
really change.
to revolve.
No, I
Yeah.
said, that's what I said, not really change. I know that,
yes, no, it doesn't really mean change. I mean,
Right, it's
petu
not
is
really.
revolution. It's 360 degree. You
Yeah.
overturn when you petula. You don't simply modify.
yeah.
You don't simply reform.
For
So
all of you who are here tonight, Denise, Mary, Olivia, Abra, Sarah, Vladimir, Charlie, Mahima, and Mia, Eldana, and all of the people that have
Sarah.
left. Guys, thank you so much for being here. I know you were not all of you are speaking, but I know you're thinking.
Yeah,
know
you're
this for
still
sure.
here.
There's no way that you can be in this space and not think. It's a very difficult, like I told you, like
thank you,
for me,
Sarah.
the first time we met in Pretoria, we had this talk, you were with Mr. Ntuli. And it was just really, I asked a
Yeah, it
question.
was at Freedom Park.
I left with, I was not sure whether I was agreeing or I wanted to hear you again. That's the truth. But I went home and I realized I need to hear this again. And that's why I'm here. That's why I've heard you so many times, because I want to continue to hear you.
And please, Itu, send us that paper. And
Yes,
I
will.
really want to talk, and I want to kind of circle back on some of our talks about like psychology, like that, this Western construct of psychology and the notion of the universality of it.
Let's have our own Zoom at some point after you pick on that unpopular opinions on Friday. I want to hear how that is going to go.
Oh yes,
After- After
I'm
you've done that on Friday, maybe after that, let's talk. I want to hear
I'm gonna share the link. I'm gonna share the link they upload on YouTube. There's a podcast program called Unpopular Opinion that is going to be interviewing me tomorrow.
Friday.
Yeah, but
It's
it's
Friday or
pre-recorded.
tomorrow?
Yeah, it's
Oh, for you
pre-recorded.
it's
It's not
Friday.
live.
It's already, yeah, he's there.
Not live.
There goes the time.
No, it's Thursday today. So tomorrow is Friday. With me, tomorrow is Friday. So
For
I'm
us,
going
it's
for an
still Wednesday.
interview. Yeah, Unpopular Opinion podcast show, is interviewing me from 9:30 to 12.
Okay.
And
Whoa.
at 1:15, I'll be starting a lecture at Wits University.
Mm.
I'm presenting a lecture to the drama and filming, students. There's a topic, in the Black Theater module, that I'm actually going to be. I've been requested to come, as a guest lecturer, specifically for that topic. It's actually for the first time, since VCU, I'm invited, by a university. You inaugurated this whole thing. You were the first, university, to call me in, to establish a relationship with me. Birds University, is second. So
before I forget, let's have a conversation over the weekend. There is an organization, they're doing this is a film. They just need somebody who's gonna do, because you're a musician.
yep.
Guys, I didn't tell you this.
His music
I
is
have
just
song
like
and music
as good.
from
Yeah,
this gentleman.
it's
But
like amazing.
this is not for this class. Let's talk. I'll give you a call over the weekend.
No, it's
Hey,
okay. And I'll
guys.
also share, and please, whoever wants my WhatsApp number, share it with them.
I can
Who's in
give
this
them.
Yeah,
class.
we'll give it to everyone.
All right, guys, please have a good night. Donna,
Mahima,
Olivia,
Mahima,
Charlie,
let's
Vladimir,
chat. Let's
Sarah
chat via
Mia.
WhatsApp.
Hey,
I'll give you the details.
Denise, you guys go sleep.
Hey,
Peace.
everybody. Bye. Thank
Abra,
you. We'll
thank you,
Bye
guys.
bye,
post
Suzanne.
the
Bye bye,
We'll
Dingani.
close for now.
Bye bye, Abra.
Thank you.
Bye bye, Mahima. Bye bye. Bye bye, Charlie. Sure.
Thank you.
Peace.
Thank you
Bye,
so
Mary.
much.
Bye, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank
Guys,
you.
thank you for
Enjoy your
coming.
night.
Bye, Sarah.
Always, always thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
guys. Thank
We
you.
will connect you for sure.
Sure. Wow. That was
Yeah, it was
amazing.
amazing.